the weeks after the Belgian Grand Prix, the little European country learned of the death of Prince Charles, the younger brother of controversial wartime King Leopold III. Charles had taken the reins of the nation as regent on Belgium's liberation in 1944, while Leopold was being investigated over whether his surrender in 1940 breached the constitution. During Charles's regency, many reforms, including votes for women, were passed before he handed the reins back in 1950 and retired to the coastal town of Ostend to paint. Over in F1's next destination of the USA, Star Wars fever had hit the country again, with the release of The Return of the Jedi, the third movie in the original trilogy. While the movie never quite reached the critical or commercial heights of its predecessors, by any other metric it was a roaring success and remains in the top 10 biggest box office hits of all time when adjusted for inflation. And a Canadian airliner made an emergency landing in northern Kentucky when a small fire broke out on board. The aircraft landed successfully, and the doors were opened to evacuate the passengers, which unfortunately caused the fire to flash over, leading to the deaths of 23 of the passengers, mostly from smoke inhalation. Among them was Canadian folk singer Stan Rogers, just 33 years old, who was best known internationally for his 1976 sea shanty Barrett's Privateers.
Our correct four-pounders made an awful din, but with one fat ball the Yanks drove us in. God damn them all! I was told we'd cruise the seas for American gold. We'd fire no guns, shed no tears. Now I'm a broken man on a Halifax pier, the last of Barrett's Privateers.
The teams headed to the US and the Motor City of Detroit, amid rumours that, far from being the second of 4 American Grand Prix for 1983, it would be the last. The planned New York Grand Prix looked like being postponed to deal with local objections, while it was an open secret that Caesar's Palace was trying to get out of hosting a race after making huge losses in 1981 and 82, despite the draw of a title decider both years. With Long Beach switching to IndyCar for 1984, as the teams met up for the second Detroit Grand Prix, it looked like this new circuit was already the future of F1 in America. The inaugural Detroit Grand Prix in 1982 had provided an entertaining race won from 17th place by John Watson, but a slew of teething troubles with organisation. For 1983, the authorities were promising they'd learned much from the feedback, and by way of proof had tweaked the layout a little, eliminating the unpopular hairpin at turn 5 and easing out the chicane just before the pit entrance, with the overall effect of making the circuit faster and more flowing. There were increased safety measures too, and much more thought given to spectator placement, with one grandstand being constructed especially for disabled access, including an electric lift and wheelchair spaces. The American viewing public, despite the frequency of the sport's visits to the country, had still yet to be fully convinced of the merits of F1 as opposed to their own domestic series, and to try and enthuse them, and as a gesture to the citizens of Detroit inconvenienced by the road closures, admittance was free for Friday's free practice and qualifying sessions. Unfortunately for the organisers, the day was damp and miserable, so there were relatively few taking them up on the offer. If there were any aficionados among those who did, they may have noted the absence of the Ram team. LSAO Salazar's sponsors had finally got fed up and pulled the plug. Ram had done a one-race deal with Gilles Villeneuve's brother Jacques to race in Canada, and had gone straight on to Mossport Park to let him test the car. Other than that, with Thierry Boutsen now behind the wheel of the Arrows for the rest of the season, the entry list was as it had been in Belgium. Behind the scenes, designer Gérard Ducarouge had been signed up by the ailing Lotus team after his sudden dismissal by Alfa Romeo early in the season, and the Hethel outfit would be hoping he could help them turn things around quickly, as they had yet to trouble the scorers. Saturday morning was overcast and cool, but dry at least, and times on track were faster, until about halfway through the session, when the clouds broke and the sun beat down. The roads quickly heated up, and the sudden change in temperature was enough to scupper the times of anyone who'd left it too late, their tyre choice locked in from the start of the session. Between that and the levelling effects of the street circuit on the Turbo versus Atmo battle, the grid had a few surprises. René Arnoux was on pole, with Nelson Piquet alongside in the Arrowhead Brabham. Behind Arnoux was teammate Tombe, alongside Elio De Angelis having a rare good day in the Lotus 93T. Marc Sura put his Arrows a fine 5th, alongside an equally excellent Alboreto in the Benetton Tyrrell. Chiva was next in 7th and top American, with De Cesaris alongside, fresh from his Spa heroics. Derek Warwick was 9th in the Tolman, and Thierry Boutsen an excellent 10th in only his second race in the Arrows. Of the big names, Rosberg was 12th, Prost 13th, Patrese 15th, Lauda 18th, Lafitte 20th and Watson 21st. Piercarlo Ghinzani managed to drag the overweight Azella Alfa onto the grid for the first time, and with no Salazar there would only be one driver who failed to qualify. It was Corrado Fabi, who might well feel a little aggrieved, not least because his brother Teo had been on pole at the Indy 500 the previous weekend. Sunday's weather was absolutely glorious, the light glittering among the yachts drawn up in the Detroit River alongside the start, some 70,000 packing the stands and an estimated 30,000 more at various unticketed vantage points. Just as in Belgium, the start had to be aborted, this time because De Cesaris stalled his Alfa just as he was taking up his grid place after the formation lap, but luckily the start sequence hadn't begun yet, so it was a rather simple matter to cancel. A lap was scrubbed from the race, the usual 5-minute break was called, and then it was time for a second go. Perhaps a tenth of a second before the lights went green, De Angelis was already moving, startling Tombe sufficiently for his foot to slip off the clutch and stall the Ferrari. As Arnoux, Piquet and De Angelis thundered towards the first corner, Patrick was left cursing as everyone squeezed through, which also dropped Seurat starting directly behind him down the order as he had to go round. It was Piquet who got to the first corner first, with De Angelis slotting in third, but already Peter Waugh was being informed that Elio was being penalised a full minute for his jump start. Rather than pushing Tombe off the line as usual and allowing him to get moving, the marshals attached a crane and dragged the Ferrari off the track, so one car was out already and Corrado Fabi could probably have started after all. Behind De Angelis came De Cesaris, Alboreto, Warwick, a typically fast-starting Rosberg, and Cheever, although the American was the next casualty with a broken fuel feed line after just 4 laps. Around the same time Ghinzani's Alfa Romeo engine terminally overheated and he pulled into the pits to retire. With Arnoux close on Piquet's heels and De Angelis close behind them, the leaders were quickly drawing away from De Cesaris and the rest, especially after De Angelis ended up with a gearbox full of neutrals on lap 6, rendering his penalty moot. Piquet was planning to run through with a single tank of fuel, so Arnoux needed to get by and soon if he was to be able to get enough of a lead to make his own fuel stop. For several laps he was all over the back of the Brabham before finally getting through on the start of lap 10 and rapidly clearing off into the distance. Meanwhile behind him Rosberg was on a charge, disposing of Warwick and Alboreto and getting ahead of De Cesaris for third on lap 11, frustratingly doing so while the cameras were watching empty road. While all this was going on, Marc Seurat's afternoon was being comprehensively ruined. Having already dropped back from the start after Tombe stalled right in front of him, he was now black flagged into the pits as his car was seen leaking fluid the marshals thought was oil. In he came, the team checked him over but couldn't see a problem, so sent him back out, only for him to be sent straight back in by the marshals. The team looked again and found that there was some litter in the side pods causing the engine to run hot and the radiator to boil over, which was the leaking fluid the marshals had seen. By the time he had finally regained the track without being black flagged, he was some way behind in last place. By now, Arnoux had quite a lead, and Piquet had Rosberg also bearing down on him, and De Cesaris had lost another place to Alboreto and was coming under threat from Derek Warwick's Tolman. By lap 20, Rosberg was right up with Piquet and searching for a way past. The camera cut away to show Prost making a pit stop. The Belgium winner was another one having a bad day, having knocked his front right wing off getting past Boutsen earlier, and when they came back, Rosberg was past and already leaving the Brabham behind. Soon enough, half distance was approaching and René Arnoux was the first in for his scheduled fuel stop on lap 29. It was a good stop and returned him to the track just ahead of Piquet, while Rosberg was held up with a sticking wheel nut and returned to the track behind a non-stopping Alboreto. Piquet had been husbanding his tyres for just this moment and now had a short window to attack Arnoux before the Ferrari's tyres got up to temperature. He gave it a good go, but it was becoming obvious that he wasn't going to be able to get past when Arnoux rather anticlimactically broke down with a fuel injection problem, leaving Piquet in the lead of the race by a huge margin over second-placed Alboreto. The unfortunate René appeared to have brought his bad luck with him from Renault, and this wouldn't help his cause with the Ferrari faithful who were already talking about his stay at Maranello being a short one. Meanwhile, John Watson had been doing his usual thing, making his way methodically up through the field, helped by a number of cars breaking down or pitting ahead of him. He was now up to 4th, and provided some entertainment in the latter stages of the race by charging up to the back of Rosberg and having a few sniffs, before Rosberg put his foot down a bit and pulled away again. But the race was pretty much over as a contest, as Piquet needed to simply keep going till the finish, with his boost turned right down to economise on fuel and put less strain on the engine. He presumably took some satisfaction in lapping Prost, but otherwise the second half of the race was a fairly processional affair. That was until lap 51, 9 before the end, when Piquet suddenly slowed with a punctured left rear tyre and Alboreto came past into the lead, with Rosberg also getting past as the Brazilian nursed his car round to the pits for new boots. Watson got by while he was stationary, as the Brabham team gave him some new sticky tyres and put in some fuel so he could turn up the boost and see if he could catch up. But there wasn't enough time, and Alboreto kept it pointing the right way to take his second career win and his first points of the year, with Rosberg and Watson joining him on the podium. The announcer at the track was very keen to point out that all three were using our Ford engines, though in fact the Cosworth operation in Northampton had very little to do with the Detroit Giants bar the initial funding back in 1967. Nonetheless, it was a landmark 155th win for the firm's DFV and DFY engines, which had powered 12 of the 15 drivers' champions since its introduction. Nelson Piquet salvaged 4th place, with Lafitte a lonely 5th, and Mansell pipping a tired Boutsen to the last point late on to finally open the scoring for Lotus. Piquet could take some comfort from Prost, Arnoux and Tambay all failing to score, but all eyes were on Alboreto, who had done his chances of a move to a big team no harm at all. Just as in Caesar's Palace in 1982, Michele had inherited a fortuitous win, but only because he'd been up there in a position to take advantage. As the season approached its halfway mark, the top 4 drivers were now separated by just 6 points, with just 11 covering the top 5 in the constructors' table.